Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a country, right? Its financial system is going through this seismic shift. And suddenly, you've got powerful business interests and political figures intertwined in ways that honestly feel straight out of a novel.
Mm.
That's exactly what we're diving into today. We've received a really fascinating stack of sources detailing these deep connections between political parties and major owner groups in Iceland, particularly during a pivotal time for its banking sector.
It really is fascinating. What these sources paint is a picture of a system where financial power and political influence became incredibly difficult to separate, almost symbiotic, you could say.
Okay.
Our mission today really is to explore these connections, try to understand the motivations behind them, and see what happens when those lines blur between, business ambitions and political governance. We'll be looking at who owned what, who they were connected to politically, and the impact of these relationships.
So if you've ever wondered how money and power truly operate behind the scenes, or maybe how rapidly privatized economies can create these unexpected allegiances, well, you're in for a treat.
Definitely.
We're going to try and distill these really complex relationships into clear insights, basically giving you a shortcut to understanding a critical moment in Icelandic history.
Yeah.
Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
So the sources kick off with this really striking description of Iceland's financial sector just changing fundamentally. And it wasn't just a quiet change of ownership, was it?
Not at all.
Our sources actually refer to it as the beginning of this adventure for the banks.
Hmm.
I mean, what does that phrase tell us about the mood and the ambition of the time? Especially when you read that almost every Icelandic bank and depository institution became private before it all ended.
That phrase, beginning of this adventure, it's incredibly telling, isn't it?
Yeah.
It suggests excitement, massive opportunity, maybe even a kind of speculative, almost gold rush feel. This wasn't some slow, cautious transition we're talking about. It was rapid, a wholesale transformation of the financial sector. Think about it, moving from banks mostly owned by the state to a system where pretty much every bank, every depository institution becomes private almost overnight, it seems.
So Íslandsbanki HF, that one was already private, but the others.
Exactly. Icelandsbanki was private, but the other major banks were privatized right at this beginning of this adventure, as the source puts it. And that signals this really dramatic reshuffling of power and wealth.
Okay.
And when you privatize an entire sector that quickly, you inevitably create a kind of vacuum, right? A space for new players, new forms of influence to take hold.
Makes sense.
Suddenly, there's immense private wealth to be made, and fast. And that kind of environment, well, it often encourages significant risk-taking. You get individuals, groups, all vying for control, for expansion.
Like a race.
Pretty much. And what's crucial here is that the established rules, the regulations, often designed for a slower, maybe more state-controlled system, they just struggle to keep pace.
They couldn't adapt quickly enough.
Exactly. It created fertile ground for these ambitious individuals and groups, not just to get rich, but also to exert considerable power, often pushing the boundaries, of what was acceptable, maybe even legal. It set a very dynamic, almost volatile stage for everything that follows. It fundamentally altered the whole economic and political landscape.
And the sources even give us this quick rundown on Icelandic corporate structures, F and F. They say, a company F, by shares, is a private limited liability company, and a company HF, by shares, is a limited liability company. Now, why is that important for us, for you listening, to get that these were specifically private banks with shareholders like LTD and not state-run anymore? What did that mean practically?
Oh, understanding that is absolutely fundamental because the legal structure, it directly informs the incentives, and that in turn explains so much of the behavior we see described later.
Right. Well, why?
Precisely. So, to break it down simply for you, an F, that's Einkahlutafélag, is basically a private limited company. Think LTD in the UK or LLC in the US, roughly. An Einkahlutafélag is more like a public limited company, a PLC.
Okay.
But the key thing for our discussion, both are private. They're owned by shareholders, not the state. And that means their core drive shifts profoundly. It goes from, theoretically serving the public good
To making money for the owners.
exactly, Profit and maximizing shareholder value become the primary goals. And that's a crucial distinction. When banks were state-owned, their mandate, at least on paper, was public service, financial stability, supporting national economic policy.
Right.
Privatization flips that completely. Suddenly, the engine is generating returns for investors. And this new paradigm, well, it naturally intensifies the pursuit of profit and influence, too. It really sets the stage for these deep political connections we're going to talk about.
And the limited liability part.
Yes, that's vital, too. Limited liability means the shareholders' personal assets are protected if the company goes bust. If the bank fails, shareholders generally only lose what they put into the shares, not their house or personal savings.
Which might make them bolder.
It can, yes. While it's standard corporate law in certain contexts, especially rapid growth or high-stakes environments, it can embolden companies and their leaders to take on bigger risks in that aggressive pursuit of higher profits. It removes a layer of personal financial fear, you could say.
Okay.
So this structural change, AHF, limited liability, wasn't just paperwork. It fundamentally rewrote the rules of the game. It prioritized private enterprise with all the ambitions and pressures that come with it, and that raises huge questions about regulation and oversight in that kind of fast-moving environment.
So building on that, this new profit-driven private banking world, the sources really start naming names, or at least groups, and connecting them politically. This is where it gets really granular, doesn't it?
It does, very specific.
It's not just vague influence. The sources draw these clear lines between specific political parties and actual ownership of major banks and investment groups. What does it really mean when the Independence Party is linked to the owner group of Iceland's bank EHF, which then became Glitnir Bank, and also the powerful FL Group HF, or when the Progressive Party is tied to existent Kofting Bank, and the Social Democratic Alliance Party connected to the Bauger Group HF and also FL Group HF. I mean, these aren't just casual supporters dropping a few kroners in the collection plate, are they?
Absolutely not. This is a pivotal insight into sources. It lays bare concrete, substantial financial partnerships, not just, ideological similarities. And that word the source uses, prominent. That's key.
Prominent ownership.
Right. It tells you these weren't minor fringe connections. These were significant influential stakes held by individuals or groups with very clear political leanings. For instance, the source says, owners connected to the Independence Party were prominent in the owner group of Iceland's Bank H, later Glitnir Bank in the beginning, and then FL Group H later became the prominent owner of Glitnir Bank. So you see an evolution, but always involving prominent, politically connected owners.
Okay.
And similarly, when owners connected to the Progressive Party were prominent in the owner group of Exister Kofting Bank, and the Social Democrats owners were prominent in the owner group, Bauger Group HF, FL Group HF, well, it paints a very clear picture. These weren't just individuals who happened to vote a certain way. These were major financial entities with significant political ties.
So what does that actually signify? What's the implication?
It signifies a powerful, almost symbiotic relationship. Think about it. Political decisions on regulation, maybe government contracts, even just the level of oversight could directly benefit these financial interests.
And the other way around.
Exactly. These financial entities could provide the parties with significant resources, influence, support, funding campaigns, shaping public opinion in ways that help their shared interests. Yeah. This kind of deep, explicit connection really blurs those traditional lines between finance and governance. It creates an environment where economic power and political power can sort of feed off each other, mutually reinforcing their ambitions. It's really the essence of how policy and profit can get tangled up, which, of course, presents huge challenges for transparency and public trust.
And it gets even closer, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Beyond direct ownership, the sources point out these really personal relationships, marriages, family ties, binding these worlds even tighter.
Yes, that's another fascinating layer.
We read that the minister of the Independence Party, who later also served for Viðreisn, the Reform Party, was married to the director of private banking services of Kaupthing Bank HF. And the same applies to the minister of the Left Green Party. She was married to one of Kaupthing Bank HF barristers at Allen & Over LLP and Legasto. That's a top law firm.
Indeed.
And then, this one really stands out. One of Exista's two CEOs was the son of Iceland's state prosecutor at the time. The state prosecutor. Yeah. What kind of picture do these incredibly close personal ties paint for us?
Well, they reveal this additional layer, doesn't it? It's often subtle, maybe less visible than corporate ownership, but incredibly powerful. It's influence operating beneath the surface of those formal structures.
Right.
It's not just about business deals or policy debates anymore. It's about shared social circles, family interests, professional networks, things that can profoundly blur the lines of impartiality and objectivity. And in a small, interconnected society like Iceland, where key figures in politics, finance, even law enforcement might, socialize together or be related, these ties become particularly potent.
So not necessarily illegal, but problematic.
Exactly. While these relationships aren't necessarily illegal in themselves, they inevitably raise questions about perceived conflicts of interest. Just imagine the potential for influence on decisions, even if it's unconscious. Or just how difficult it might be to maintain strict impartiality when the person whose company you're regulating, or maybe even investigating, is a close family member or your spouse.
Yeah, I can see that.
Over time, this can seriously erode public trust in the independence of institutions. It challenges the whole idea of checks and balances, because the people who are supposed to be checking the power are sometimes intimately connected to those wielding it.
And that Exista example,
Yeah.
the state prosecutor's son as CEO.
That one is particularly striking, isn't it? Because Exista wasn't just any company. It was a major shareholder in Carnegie Bank and owned critical infrastructure Simon, the internet provider, and Mila, the distribution network.
Essential services.
Absolutely. So this isn't just about banks anymore. It's about potential influence over vital public services and, critically, the mechanisms of legal oversight itself. Having the state prosecutor's son as CEO of a company with such reach, well, it amplifies those concerns about potential influence way beyond just financial dealings. It touches on national infrastructure and the very processes designed to ensure fair play and accountability. These informal networks, they're often much harder for the public to see and scrutinize than formal affiliations, making them an extremely powerful, if subtle, force.
So let's connect these threads then. We've got these powerful, politically connected owner groups, these personal ties, and these financial entities weren't just sticking to banking, were they?
Not at all. They're expanding rapidly.
The sources tell us Iceland's Banki HF owned the investment company Stromer HF, which later became Stromer Barias Investment Bank.
So moving deeper into finance.
Vertical integration. And Exista.
Wow. Not only one of the biggest shareholders in Carnegie Bank, but also the owner of the internet provider Simon and Mila, owner of a distribution network for Iceland.
Critical infrastructure, like we
Right?
said.
Plus, individuals like Eiríkur S. Johansson moving into key roles, like Director of Nordic Investments for Bauger Group A at the time of the expansion. This is way more than just money sloshing around, isn't it? Feels like a strategic expansion, building empires.
That's exactly what it looks like. This is where you really grasp the scale and the ambition of these emerging financial powers. The expansion described here isn't just about getting bigger. It feels like a deliberate strategic consolidation of power across multiple critical sectors of Icelandic society.
Right.
When Iceland's Banki, a major commercial bank, also owns an investment bank like Stromer Bararas, well, that's integrating different parts of the financial industry under one roof. They weren't just doing basic banking. They were deep into capital markets, M&A, high-stakes stuff. It amplified their reach, their influence.
But Exista's portfolio, as you said, is even more striking. Huge stake in capital, massive financial leverage there. But then adding ownership of what are essentially utilities, the internet provider, the distribution network.
That everyone relies on.
Exactly. These aren't just businesses. They're the arteries of modern society, the modern economy.
Hey.
Controlling them gives you immense power, not just financially, but potentially over information flow, communications, logistics across the whole country. It suggests a real desire for control over essential services, which gives you incredible economic leverage and maybe even influence over public discourse itself. So concentrating power in these diverse, strategically important sectors creates this very powerful, interconnected web. A web that could easily overshadow independent oversight and wield substantial influence in political decisions far beyond typical lobbying. And putting key people like Eiríkur S. Johansson in strategic roles just underscores the deliberate, calculated nature of this consolidation. It's a classic example, really, of how financial ambition can weave itself deep into the fabric of society, creating this formidable force that's really hard to challenge or regulate effectively.
Okay, so against this backdrop, rapid privatization, tangled ownership, personal ties, expanding empires, the sources inject this really dramatic element, a hateful conflict. That's the phrase used by Össur Skarphéðinsson.
Powerful wording.
He describes this struggle between what he calls the dynasties in the Independence Party, nicknames like the Octopus or the 14 Families, and these newly rich commercial Vikings. He said these newcomers had accumulated a lot of wealth and had become very powerful in the economy after the bank privatizations. What does this description, this imagery, tell us about the stakes, the atmosphere? This sounds way beyond just economic competition.
You're absolutely right. This wasn't just polite competition. Esther Skarfavenson's description is incredibly potent because it frames the whole situation not just as business rivalry, but as this deeply entrenched, almost tribal power struggle.
Tribal, yeah.
And the imagery is crucial. The octopus, the 14 families, these represent the established old money elites deeply rooted in the Independence Party who'd historically held sway. They were the existing power structure.
She established.
Exactly. And on the other side, you have the newly rich commercial Vikings. I mean, that term alone evokes ambition, aggression, a readiness to challenge the old ways. These were the people, the groups, who had rapidly gained immense wealth and power during those swift bank privatizations.
Okay.
And the hateful conflict comes directly from this clash, old power versus new ambition. The rapid privatization didn't just create wealth, it fundamentally disrupted the existing power balance. It created that vacuum we talked about, and these new rich were more than eager to fill it, challenging the established order.
So a real fight for control.
Absolutely. Intense competition for influence, for resources, and critically for political favor. The sheer scale of wealth and power these newcomers had amassed meant they were a serious force. They weren't just going to defer to the old guard anymore.
Right.
This dynamic created this incredibly charged political and economic environment. Power was constantly being contested. The stakes were huge, essentially, who would control Iceland's economic and political future. And this animosity, this bitterness, fueled either by wanting to protect what you had or carve out something new. It's central to understanding why these new rich felt they needed to seek out political allies, political shelter, as the source puts it.
They needed backup.
They needed political backing to cement their position, to challenge the old guard, and just to navigate what had clearly become a very hostile landscape for them.
And right in the middle of this hateful conflict was the prime minister at the time, David Oddsson. According to Usser, Oddsson joined this team, meaning the established side, with a nod, and was then accused of abusing political power in order to restrict them, the newcomers, in every way. That's incredibly strong language.
It really is.
And the sources add, the U-Rich apparently saw Davy as a ghoul with horns and a tail. I mean, what does that tell us about the political climate? The personal nature of these fights and how the state itself was being perceived?
It paints a really stark picture, doesn't it? It suggests a profound level of distrust and a deeply personalized animosity. That accusation, abusing political power in order to restrict them in every way, indicates this pervasive belief among the new rich that the state machinery itself,
Like regulators, laws.
exactly, regulatory bodies, legislative power, even the prime minister's office, that it was all being strategically weaponized against them. It wasn't seen as neutral governance. It was seen as an active tool in this ongoing economic and political battle.
Yeah.
And that description, ghoul with horns and a tail, it just underscores the sheer intensity of their animosity, how deeply they saw him as an adversary. It suggests a complete breakdown of any kind of professional or even respectful relationship. It's just visceral hatred.
Yeah.
That level of personal vilification coming from a powerful economic group towards the head of government is pretty extraordinary. It speaks volumes about the no-holds-barred nature of this conflict.
So how does that perception, the state as an enemy, influence things?
Well, when powerful economic players see the state, especially its leader, as an active adversary rather than a neutral referee, it profoundly shapes their strategies. It undoubtedly intensifies their search for what the sources call political cover.
Right, that term again. What exactly does that mean in this context?
Political cover here is basically about these powerful economic interests trying to shield themselves or gain an advantage by aligning with specific political parties or figures other than the one they see as hostile.
Oh.
It could mean lobbying hard for favorable regulations, maybe securing government contracts through allies, or simply having political figures publicly defend their actions or interests, especially when they're under scrutiny or feeling attacked by the state apparatus led by Oddsson in their view.
So finding protectors.
Essentially, yes. In this environment, where the prime minister was seen as an active antagonist, seeking political shelter from other parties wasn't just advantageous. It probably felt like a matter of survival for these new commercial Vikings. It portrays this political environment where the lines between governance and outright economic warfare were just incredibly blurred, with huge consequences for everyone involved.
Okay, so against this backdrop, the PM seen as an enemy, a major business empire, Bogsveldes under investigation, politics shaking with anger. This is when the sources say the wealthy group actively sought political shelter.
Right, the timing is crucial.
They went specifically to the Social Democratic Alliance Party, with its chairman Ingebjørg Sorun Gisladottir, who even got nicknamed Boggs Boga.
A very telling nickname.
Then there's the Borgarn speech. Described as an ideological basis for her party, it apparently raised the cause of bonus and couching. In fact, several companies was raised against Devi, which sounds like picking a side very publicly.
It certainly seems that way, interpreted as aligning on their side on the chessboard.
And then, the consequence. After the bank collapse, the sources say investigative reports attributed its causes to, among other things, the behavior of individuals connected to these companies, the very companies they'd championed. And the party found it difficult to defend itself from the name Collapse Party. This really does sound like a cautionary tale.
It absolutely is. This section powerfully illustrates that direct, often painful, link between political alignment and eventual accountability, especially in such a volatile financial world. Let's just break down the Bagsveldi part first.
Okay.
This was a major Icelandic business empire known for aggressive expansion, sometimes controversial practices. And at this specific time, it was under intense investigation. That created this political firestorm, that sense that everything shook with anger. This atmosphere of scrutiny and conflict created this urgent, almost existential need for these powerful, wealthy groups to find allies, to get that political shelter.
Made them desperate, maybe.
Could well be. And their move to explicitly seek this shelter, going through the Confederation of Icelandic Employers, apparently, but directing it specifically at the Social Democratic Alliance and its chair, Ingebjørg Solrun Gisladottir. That's highly significant. And that nickname, Baugsboga, Boga being short for Ingebjørg, Baugs for the Bauger group, it's a public marker of how close this alignment was perceived to. It wasn't secret. It was part of the public story.
Right.
Then the Borgarn speech. That's another critical moment. When a speech meant to lay out the party's ideology, explicitly raise the cause of bonus and kaufing against Davi, it was a clear public endorsement. It signaled a deep alignment, seen by many as taking their side on the chessboard. It wasn't subtle at all. It showed a willingness to openly champion these specific business interests against their perceived political opponent.
And then the crash happened.
And then the crash happened. The tragic irony, the core of the cautionary tale, emerges subsequently when the bank collapse occurred. The sources say those investigative reports pointed fingers partly at the behavior of people linked to those very companies.
Ouch.
Big ouch. Because the Social Democratic Alliance had publicly championed them, and as a result, it became incredibly difficult for the party to defend itself from the name Collapse Party. That initial search for political shelter and the party's strategic alignment, which probably seemed smart or necessary at the time, it turned into this huge political liability when the whole financial system crumbled.
Yeah.
It just raises this fundamental question, really, for political parties everywhere. How do you balance supporting economic growth, advocating for business interests, with that critical need to maintain some independent distance from powerful private players, especially when the financial landscape is shifting so fast and potentially unstable? The Social Democrats' experience here is just a potent, enduring example of the long-term political cost of getting too close, too publicly.
So we've heard about the Independence Party linked to Icelands, Banki, Glitnir, and FL Group. The Progressive Party tied to Exista Kaufjang. The Social Democratic Alliance clearly associated with Bauger and FL Group. Even the Left Green Party and Via Raisin, the Reform Party, drawn in through those personal connections to Kaufjang. After all that, the sources deliver this really strong kind of overarching conclusion. They state, it can therefore be said with truth that no Icelandic political party has been immune to all the blundering perpetrators in this scenario. That's not about pointing fingers at one party, is it? It sounds like a systemic issue.
Exactly. That statement is the crucial unifying takeaway from all the specifics we've just gone through. It powerfully summarizes the evidence and makes it crystal clear this wasn't just one party making dodgy alliances.
Right.
Instead, it testifies to how pervasive these entanglements were. It suggests the drive for political influence, or maybe the desire to align with powerful financial interests. It cut across ideologies, across different factions. That phrase, no Icelandic political party has been immune to all the blundering perpetrators. It's key. It implies this widespread susceptibility, a kind of systemic vulnerability within the political landscape during that period of rapid, often aggressive economic change.
So everyone got caught up in it somehow.
It seems that way. It highlights how easily those lines can blur between legitimate political activity,
Yeah.
trying to foster growth, attract investment, and the pursuit of private advantage, which, looking back, might be seen as blundering or worse, might actually contribute to a systemic failure. It underlines the structural challenges in just maintaining independence and proper oversight when financial power and political power get so deeply intertwined right across the political spectrum. It's a reminder that these entanglements aren't always about explicit corruption. Sometimes they just arise from a convergence of interests, ambitions, the sheer force of big economic shifts. The implication is this was a broader phenomenon affecting the very fabric of governance in Iceland at the time, creating this complex web of relationships that ultimately impacted the entire nation.
And then, like a final, quiet but heavy note, our sources mention nationalization as other related content. They don't detail the process itself, but just seeing that word there after everything we've discussed about these tangled interests,
Yeah.
it really hints at the ultimate consequence, doesn't it? Feels like the inevitable endpoint.
It does indeed. Mentioning nationalization, there acts almost like a silent epilogue, doesn't it? A stark summary of the profound systemic failure that eventually unfolded. Even without the details, its inclusion right after discussing all these connections strongly implies it was a necessary, dramatic consequence of everything that came before.
A last resort.
Absolutely. Nationalization, especially in a financial crisis context, is usually the measure of last resort. It happens when the private system has failed so badly that the state has to step in, often taking ownership of failed banks or industries, just to stop a total economic collapse and stabilize things.
So what does that suggest about everything we've talked about?
In the context of our deep dive, it suggests that the whole adventure of privatization, the hateful conflicts that followed, the aggressive expansion, the political maneuvering for cover, it ultimately led to a point where the private sector's collapse was so severe, so systemic, that the public sector, the state, had to pick up the pieces and bear the enormous burden of the rescue. It underscores the ultimate failure of that privatized system and the political financial connections that shaped it. It shows the inability of the market, structured and influenced as it was, to correct itself before catastrophe hit.
And it leaves big questions.
Huge questions about accountability, financial, political, societal. How does a nation even begin to rebuild trust and stability after failures on that scale? What are the long-term costs to society when the pursuit of private profit and political influence leads to a crisis that needs public intervention like that? Nationalization, seen this way, isn't just an economic policy, it's really a testament to the fragility of systems when those crucial lines between power, finance, and governance become critically, fatally blurred.
So wrapping this up for you, our listener,
Yeah.
what can you take away from this deep dive into this remarkable period in Iceland? We've journeyed through this time of intense change. We've seen how tightly woven those threads of political power and financial ambition became. From that rapid bank privatization, first called an adventure, to the intense political rivalries, those dynasties versus the newly rich commercial Vikings, and that desperate search for political shelter. It seems clear these weren't just isolated incidents. It looked like a systemic pattern of entanglement.
Yeah, it does seem that way.
The sources vividly showed us how even those deep personal connections, ministers married to bank execs, played a role, and how a whole political party, the Social Democrats, ended up tagged as the collapse party because of perceived allegiances and actions like that Borgarn speech.
This deep dive really does underscore that enduring challenge, doesn't it? Maintaining transparent governance, financial integrity, especially when you've got rapid economic change and powerful new players emerging. That insight that no Icelandic political party has been immune, it isn't just looking back at history. It's a pretty stark reminder of how easily those lines can blur between legitimate economic advocacy and maybe undue influence, even with the best intentions sometimes.
Yep.
It highlights that complex interplay legal structures, personal ambitions, political necessity, social pressures, and how all those factors can combine and lead to profound consequences, even something as drastic as nationalization. Ultimately, the story is a powerful case study, really. It demonstrates how critical robust checks and balances are, and the constant vigilance needed from citizens and institutions alike to protect the integrity of a nation's systems.
So as you go about your week, here's something to think about. In any society, when does that pursuit of economic growth, often championed by political parties, cross the line? When does it become an uncritical endorsement of powerful private interests? And what are the long-term consequences of that blurring, not just for the economy, but for public trust, and maybe for the very fabric of democratic governance?